This is what ends up happening when we have a strong federal government that creates regulation and enforces it on law-abiding citizens, and then states can manipulate their traffic regulations to get around it. And that's what ends up happening. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Gap Fillers podcast. This is a special edition with the help of my good buddy Carlos. With this nice setup. I want to cover a specific story today based on the accident that happened down in Fort Pierce earlier this week. For those of you who don't know, an accident with a semi doing an illegal U-turn happened. Now, when I first heard about this story, as a former truck driver, I was just, it's another accident, but guy shouldn't have been doing that. Then you come to find out he's an immigrant, then an illegal immigrant, and then he's not supposed to be in this country. And then you see the video, and he shows no remorse, nothing. And the fact that all of those facts can be kind of ignored if this wasn't the idea that he wasn't supposed to be here. If you were not supposed to be here, if 3 people would have been alive if he wasn't here. Now, Gavin Newsom has come out and say, Americans, have more accidents every year. But the very fact is that he should not have been here. Now, let's get a little bit into the story. This is from the Palm Coast NBC affiliate. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration is launching an investigation into the fatal Florida Turnpike crash that killed 3 people in Fort Pierce last week. Now, this is a good start. The problem is that this is going to create more problems for the people who are supposed to be here, because the government we get is the sum of the people who are here, right? If culture, if our ability to regulate ourselves demands no regulation, then we don't get the regulation. The problem is that it only takes 3 to 5% of anybody doing anything to create this problem, right? So if somebody runs a red light, if only 3% out of 100 people run a red light, they still put up a traffic camera. They still put up extra security. It demands more tyranny, and that is the problem with something like this. On top of the fact that he shouldn't have been here, on top of the fact that he was issued a CDL through California that ended up killing 3 Floridians, all of that is based solely on the fact that it's going to create more problems for Americans who live here already. This is a cultural problem that we have in this country because of that. Okay, so let's go into this a little bit more. All right, so the Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, said an investigation will look into both the driver and motor carrier, White Hawk Carriers Incorporated. All right. Again, this is from the Palm Coast affiliate from NBC. All right. So he said this was a preventable tragedy and an enforcement of radical immigration policies, which have turned the trucking industry into a lawless frontier. And this is particularly the problem, that we have a trucker shortage already here in America. The problem is amplified by having these immigrants that don't know how to drive in America. Now, driving, what you don't realize is that driving is all about etiquette. Okay, you don't do things because a cop is beside you. You do it because of the extreme consequences of the action. You're driving at 60 miles an hour, a 1-ton to a 3-ton vehicle typically, whereas this driver was driving a 70-foot rig that possibly was loaded up to 80,000 pounds. So the consequences were so extreme. In fact, and so extreme it killed 3 people, and that's the problem. And what will end up happening is that there'll be more trucking regulations put on Americans for an illegal immigrant. Okay, so Harinjir Singh, the semi-truck driver, is accused of making an illegal U-turn on the Florida Turnpike. What he actually did is he cut through where the highway patrolmen sit and it's for emergency vehicles only because there's so few turnarounds on the turnpike. So that is really what ended up happening. And so if you go through further, okay, let's see here. They did a test, and he passed 3 out of the 12. Let's see here. I want to get this right. 2 of the 12 verbal questions he answered wrong, or he answered right, and only 1 of the 4 traffic signs. So how did he get a CDL? I went to truck driving school. It is not that easy. You have to parallel park a 70-foot rig between cones, and you only have about an 8-foot margin of error. So there's no way that he got this without a little bit of leeway from the California government. And this is what ends up happening when we have a strong federal government that creates regulation and enforces it on law-abiding citizens, and then states can manipulate their traffic regulations to get around it. And that's what ends up happening. So you get an illegal immigrant doing an illegal U-turn, not being able to answer verbal questions, and not being able to identify highway traffic signs. All this to say is that California has caused the deaths of 3 Floridians, and what will end up happening is we'll get more regulation. All right, so that's the summary. Now, what can we do to prevent this? Now, the state of Florida should immediately seek at least to sue the state of California in order to figure out how this happened. Okay, so we need to at least do a federal investigation, but Florida needs to sue for very specific reparations for that family, and see if there's any more of these immigrants coming in through California CDLs. Okay, so if California is not forced to recognize Florida firearms licenses, then Florida should not be forced to agree to illegal immigrant CDLs from California, at the very least. And so that should be the very beginning of this investigation. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Gap Fillers podcast. Once again, thank you to Carlos. And freedom demands responsibility, and have a good week.